Hello. It's been a crazy, crazy weekend. We've had some snow and wind. We are fortunate that we're not part of the terrible, Arctic blast, I think they're calling it. When I looked at a map this morning, um, for a map of the United States for the cold sections, you could see it go right past the state where I live. And so fortunately, it might look like this outside, but it's not nearly as cold as it is in some parts of the country. So I'll take that as a blessing and send my prayers to those who aren't so fortunate. I had a friend who lives in Texas who mentioned that she's lived there for 10 years and they've never had snow where she's at. And her poor dog was, she had a video of her dog outside who didn't know what the stuff was. So yeah, that can be a tough one when you're not used to it. People who are unfamiliar with snow, it can be a scary thing. You don't know how to drive, you don't know how to get around. Thank heavens it's a holiday for a lot of people, and so there won't be as many folks on the road. So once again, sending prayers for all of those who are having to deal with something new. This week, I wanted to do another reading for you. This one will be from Saving the Firefighter. This one is also set in Wildstone. That's the place with the castle that is, it was transplanted from Ireland to northern Washington in the mid-1800s. They have, this is a few years later, Leah and Coop from the first book are married now. And we're actually opening the story with a gal named Brooke Howe, and she knew Trace. You might know Trace from Ghost of an Inheritance. He's their tree guy. And he's got a lot of stuff that's happened in his life that people aren't familiar with. And he is in store for some things that he is not expecting. So anyway, this is from chapter 1. Brooke Howe stood with the other mourners at the graveside ceremony, her heart a mess of contradictions. Her father's sudden death had shocked everyone, especially her. How could a vibrant man who'd been such a controlling force in so many lives be gone? You won't have to fight to live your life your way anymore. A stab of guilt struck her. The tears, which had been threatening all morning, the ones she'd kept at bay, flowed down her cheeks. The terrible sense of loss overwhelmed her defenses. Her body shook with sobs, loud enough she knew people were turning to look at her. But she couldn't make the bawling stop. Her body shook with sobs loud enough she knew people were turning to look at her. But she couldn't make the bawling stop. Rather than disturb the service further, she turned and stumbled away. Audrey followed, of course, and put her arms around Brooke. She buried her face into the older woman's plump shoulders. The housekeeper had been the closest thing to a mother figure that Brooke had known. Well, as close as her father had allowed. "Oh, baby, it's going to be okay." Audrey rocked a little as she spoke, and then hummed the tune of an old hymn. Gradually, Brooke's crying slowed and finally stopped, leaving her with a bad case of hiccups. Such a public display would have horrified her father. She'd just turned 25. He'd always held a high standard of self-control and wouldn't have approved of her losing it in such a dramatic way. He'd have loved it, though, thinking it was all about him. "Thank you." She gave Audrey a big squeeze before stepping back. Wiping her eyes, Brooke glanced back at the grave. The minister had finished, and some attendees were leaving. Others scanned the crowd until they spotted Brooke. Most approached warily. They'd never seen Randall Howe's only child put on such a display before. The people, however, were gracious as they offered their condolences. Fortunately, none stayed to chat, so all she had to do was nod and give a weak smile and maybe shake their hands. When they'd gone, the only person left was Gary Shapiro, her father's attorney. He stepped forward, not bothering with small talk. "You've already seen your father's will," the rotund man said, pulling out a handkerchief, "so you know you inherit everything, including his interest in the firm." Brooke wanted nothing to do with the law office. The original decision for her to work in the law library there had been her father's doing. He'd encouraged her to study law and become a partner with him. When he'd discovered she had changed her classes behind his back, he'd gotten so angry at her that it had scared her a little. It had also been the first time she had openly fought for what she'd wanted. Brooke bit back a smile at the memory. He'd threatened to cut her off. She'd told him she would move out. Her father hadn't believed her until she'd packed her bags and headed out the front door, where a friend waited to take her away. Suddenly, Brooke's father had decided she could study library science after all, and then acted like it had been his idea all along. "Your father's partners are worried," Shapiro wiped his sweaty brow. "Because they're afraid of who I'd sell it to," Brooke sighed. Her father had partnered with men just like him. She had little doubt that as soon as they had heard he'd dropped dead, they had begun worrying about which of them would maneuver his way into the controlling interest. Weariness filled her. Brooke was sick and tired of control freak men. She was done with people telling her what to do. "I'm free." The thought gave her pause. She was free. Free of her father's control. But free to do what? Brooke glanced at the attorney. Free of the firm, for one. She still bore the emotional wounds from his partner's condescending attitudes, like the attorney who'd always decide to check his phone every single time she spoke in a meeting, or the one who'd interrupted her before she ever had a chance to speak. "Anyone interested in my father's shares can submit an offer to me through you. If I'm not satisfied, I'll open it to the public to make offers. Your father's partners will not approve." Which made the idea of selling her interest to someone outside of the current partners even more appealing. After 3 years of putting up with a bunch of misogynistic jerks and their condescension, Brooke enjoyed having a little power for once. If she wanted to be petty, she could have fun with this. It'd serve them all right if she were to find a powerful female attorney to sell the controlling interest to. But she wasn't like her father and would feel sorry for any woman who had to work there, even bossing them around. "It's up to them. I'm only interested in the highest bid. I'll leave it in your capable hands, Mr. Shapiro." Brooke took Audrey's arm. "Let's go." The ride home was a silent one. As a distraction from so many emotionally charged thoughts, Brooke focused on her driving and put her attention on a more practical issue, leaving her job at the law firm. When they got home, she would send the HR director an email. Audrey fidgeted. Something was bothering the housekeeper. She only did that when there was something she wanted to say, but wasn't sure she should. The dear woman had acted like this a lot when Brooke had been in high school and wanted to attend an event, but her father wouldn't let her go. Like that school dance, when her friends had talked her best friend Trace into climbing the tree by her bedroom window to carry her down. It'd been raining when they'd returned, and Audrey had secretly cleaned Brooke's room the next morning. A rush of gratitude filled her, and she had to blink her eyes to see the road. "Oh, Audrey, what would I have done without you all these years?" The older woman's face softened. "And that is exactly why I stayed after your mama had to leave." The shock of the words made Brooke freeze. It was a good thing they'd stopped at a light. Her dead mother had been a forbidden topic in the Howe home for as long as Brooke could remember. "You knew her?" "She hired me, hun, and was the sweetest, kindest young thing. She was only 20 when she had you. On her birthday, no less, and she loved you fiercely. Behind them, a car honked, and Brooke pulled ahead. Audrey didn't say more, but she fidgeted in her seat. Even worse, the facial tic that only appeared when she had something uncomfortable on her mind appeared. The housekeeper's nervousness was unsettling. What with Brooke's father being gone, in the past it had only ever centered on Dad. Why would Audrey be anxious about saying something now that he was gone? After pulling into the 3-car garage at the back of the old Victorian home, they entered through the kitchen. Out of habit, Brooke opened the fridge, but none of the food appealed to her. It held leftovers from the wake they'd held for her father the night before. She sighed and turned to glance around the room. When they'd planned the funeral, she hadn't wanted a bunch of fake people in the house afterward. Now it echoed in its emptiness. Why did it feel so different? It was Wednesday. Neither she nor her father would normally have been home this time of day. It was like the house knew its owner was gone. The weight of his absence pressed on her. He'd had such a powerful personality. Brooke might have resented how he'd tried to control her life, but she'd always known he loved her. How could he be gone? "Brooke, honey, I need to show you something." There it was again. She turned to face Audrey. Curious about the oddness to the woman's tone, she carried about her a sense of anticipation and worry. "What is it?" Brooke asked warily. "I need to show you something upstairs." Audrey didn't wait for a reply but left the kitchen. When the housekeeper headed for the stairs leading to the attic, Brooke stopped. They'd lived in the old house since she'd been a little girl, and the attic still held stuff left by the previous owner. She'd only been up there once with her father when they'd first moved there. The dusty attic with its dim lighting had creeped her out. She'd never returned. "I'm not going up there." Audrey heaved out a breath and turned to face her. "I've told you more than once that I've cleaned it up. It's a completely different place now. Besides, I was just up there on your birthday." The woman arched her brows, like those words held some significance. But what? Because she'd gone up there recently? Or because of when she'd been there? "Why would you go up there on my birthday?" "Come with me, and I'll show you." Audrey held out her hand, a pleading look to her eyes now. Whatever it was must be important to her. Brooke nodded. Audrey led the way. When she turned on the light, Brooke felt like she'd stepped into one of those home improvement shows with a before and after. No longer the dusty and cluttered room of Brooke's memory. The housekeeper had worked her organizational magic on the area. She'd even set up a comfortable little sitting area under the only skylight. "Wow!" Brooke went to the recliner. A novel sat on an end table she remembered had been in her father's office years ago, before he had remodeled it. "Do you come up here often?" "Are you asking if I come up here to eat chocolates and read when I should be working? You should know better. However, I do take my lunch break up here most days. Now, I want you to look at this." Audrey led the way to a spot behind a bunch of boxes. They'd been stacked in such a way that someone standing at the door couldn't see there was an opening. The boxes formed walls for what amounted to a small room within the attic. Curious, Brooke stepped into the space, which was about the size of her father's large walk-in closet. The area held a cedar chest and several shipping boxes of varying sizes. One, with no lid, sat on a table and was filled with envelopes that appeared to be used. Was Audrey a collector? Brooke's gaze shifted to the address on one written with beautiful penmanship. She blinked. It was addressed to her. Care of Audrey. "What the—" She snapped her mouth shut, her mind going in several directions all at once. Were all these addressed to her? Who had sent them? Had Audrey been keeping them from Brooke? "They're from your mother," the housekeeper said softly. "She sent them to you through me. In the beginning, your dad told me to throw them out, but I couldn't do it. So I told her to send them to me, and I'd keep them to give you later. Brooke took a step back, feeling a little lightheaded. She was already tired. She hadn't slept well since her father's death. The fatigue must be making her hear things wrong. She met Audrey's gaze. "My mother is dead." "No, hun. Your mother is very much alive. Your father told you that lie when you were little, so you'd stop asking for her." And with that, I will wish you a happy week. Thank you for listening.